Bowl season is here. Moving on to Saturday night in the New Mexico Bowl. This has been a really tough game to handicap throughout the week. That's why I waited a little bit to make this video, but we do have some more clarity around this game. SMU taking on the Cougars of BYU. You know, this line was closer to a pick. Some injury news that we'll get to in a second had this as high as SMU minus 5.5. BYU quarterback Jaron Hall has been ruled out of the game. This line has settled in around 4 towards the Mustangs here, and still a pretty high total at 64, though it opened when we thought Hall was going to play at 71.5. So this total has been steamed down pretty considerably. You know, I think the narrative with Hall out, obviously BYU is not that healthy at wide receiver right now with Puka Nacua, Gunnar Romney still battling injuries, had some injuries at linebacker over the second half of the season. I think the narrative around this game is, you know, BYU's not at full strength, kind of underperformed this year. But listen, I wouldn't say this SMU team comes into this New Mexico Bowl at full strength either. Their top receiver, Rashee Rice, opted out of this game. And, you know, they're one of these teams that really fixated on one guy in the passing game. He had 96 catches this year, accounted for virtually all of their wide receiver production. They also had an offensive lineman opt out of this game for the NFL draft too. From a football standpoint, you know, I was thoroughly unimpressed with BYU's defense throughout the year. Did get better towards the end of the year, but man, if you watch them against like East Carolina, Arkansas, some of their tougher games throughout the year, poor tackling. I mentioned that they're not really healthy at linebacker, so that's definitely hurt their run defense. They don't really generate a ton of pressure on the quarterback, even with SMU not at full strength along their offensive line. Still think they should be strong enough to protect Tanner Mordecai. Mordecai's had a good year. I think SMU's pretty solid in the run game, and ultimately do think they should be able to get into the mid-30s in this game. You know, as far as BYU, with no Jaron Hall, no idea what to expect from them offensively. I mean, he's been their guy all year, really for these last 2 years. I think he's probably been one of the more underrated quarterbacks in college football. He's an 8.5 yard per attempt kind of guy. He's mobile. He's won a lot of big games for the Cougars. No Hall. It's going to be Cade Finnegan. I believe he played at Boise State earlier in his career, but 0 pass attempts this year. I don't know how to handicap that. You know, I'll say this. While that is big news for BYU, this SMU defense is equally bad as what BYU is going to throw out there. I mean, they gave up 63 to Houston, 59 to Tulane. Hell, they even gave up 34 to Navy. So this is not a good SMU defense. Their pass rush themselves has really started to wane throughout the course of the season. Chunk runs have been an issue. Secondary hasn't been great. I would imagine Kalani Sitake is going to revert to a more of a run-first approach. You know, Chris Brooks has had a good year. I think the guys behind him are pretty serviceable at BYU, so I see no reason as to why BYU wouldn't be able to run the ball in this game. They got a pretty good offensive line themselves, and like I said, that SMU front four defensively has kind of trended in the wrong direction. Not really the hardest matchup for Cade Finnegan, even though he lacks experience. Suffice to say, this is just a really tough game to handicap. You know, what's BYU getting at quarterback? But really on the other side, how is Tanner Mordecai going to adjust to not having his number 1 receiver, his number 3 receiver? You know, it's something I've noted coming into the year. SMU just doesn't have a lot of quality depth at wide receiver right now. I don't really want to trust either of these defenses. I think there's some intrinsic value on this over at 64, given that it did open 70.5, 71. But maybe there is a chance that BYU tries to slow this game down, revert to more of a run-first approach. We already know they're a slower-paced team. Very tough game to handicap, in my opinion. These are 2 exciting teams to watch. I would imagine this game's going to get quite a bit of action. Not for me, though. I'm passing here on this New Mexico Bowl.